I've been interested in thinking about how do we teach people a little bit of Greek so that they can use Bible study tools such as Logos Bible software or perhaps Accordance and be able to use that to be able to get into the Bible in a bit more depth, even though they're not going to learn the full language of the Greek New Testament. And the book I'm going to review today is a book that is designed to do exactly that, to teach you a bit about Greek without necessarily having to know everything about it. But does it do the job? Well, that's what we're going to find out. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Bill Mounce's Greek for the Rest of Us. We're looking at the latest edition, which came out about a year ago now, so 2022, November 22 it was published. So it's a pretty recent edition, it's pretty up to date, it's been released since the release of Logos Bible Software 10, for instance, and the latest version of Accordance. I think actually Accordance may have come up with a new version since then, but it's a pretty up-to-date version, and it's certainly a big improvement on previous editions. Now, this grammar actually competes with Danny Zacharias's Biblical Greek Made Simple, which gives you like a two-phased approach, if you like. Phase one, you go through all of Zacharias's grammar, and you're going to learn how to use Logos Bible Software specifically with the grammar that he's teaching you. And then if you want to go through and learn how to read the New Testament in the original Greek, then you go through it a second time, you do a second set of exercises that are there, and this allows you to sort of give yourself, you can sort of ease yourself into it the first way with the tools, and then the second way you can dive in and learn how to read Greek instead. Now, Mounce is a little bit different. He has no goal in this book whatsoever to actually teach you to be able to read the New Testament in Greek. However, that doesn't mean to say that you're not going to learn a lot in this book. You certainly will. But that doesn't mean to say that this is really necessarily a better option or even a great option for trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve. There's a number of reasons why this is. So let's jump over into Logos Bible Software, where I've got a copy of Greek for the Rest of Us, and we can talk through what this looks like there. First of all, when you come to the contents page here, you can see that the whole thing is broken into really two broad groups, two sort of sections. Section one, or part one, is giving you a bit of basic Greek stuff, essentially. And then part two is going to give you some, what he calls church Greek, but really, the best way to think about this is really in part one of this grammar, you're getting some basic grammar, and in part two, you're going deeper. It's kind of the way that I would characterize this. And if you look at here at the contents, you can see this. You kind of got nouns, a little bit about verbs here, and then word studies. And then the second part here, you've got modifiers, you've got pronouns, you've got more on some of these things like your nominative, your cases, that sort of thing. You've got your conjunctions, you've got much more on verbs. Again, not very much though. I mean, notice here, you've got a chapter on Greek verbs from the point of view of aspect, and you've got another chapter on Greek verbs from the point of view of tense. Then you've got phrasing. Now, the whole goal really of part two of this grammar is to introduce you to the task of phrasing. What is phrasing, you may ask? Think of it as block diagramming. That's essentially what it is. But what he's doing here is he's been very deliberate about breaking those blocks that you'd normally diagram a text down to by its parts, not word by word, but by phrases, clauses, subordinate clauses, those kinds of things. So it's really much more grammatically astute, I would say, than the term block diagramming and the approach to block diagramming. I think this is a more disciplined approach to block diagramming, is essentially the best way of putting this, to what you might find if you're just going to sort of think of block diagramming as something you can intuitively work on. So we tend to, if you're going to block diagram on your own, you might be inclined to break it down into word by word, and that might be just a little bit too narrow or too defined. That might be better for grammatical diagrams, sentence diagramming, but not necessarily for block diagramming. So this is really trying to teach you how to do good block diagramming based on the phrases and the clauses and so on. So that's really what this is teaching you. So the first half gives you the foundations, basically to do word studies. The second half really gives you the foundation, if you like, to be able to do this phrasing thing. And this is where I think part of the problem occurs here, is that you can't do phrasing easily in Bible software. Now, I know that both Logos and Accordance Bible software both have some functionality built in around this, and I am not convinced that either of them do a really great job of this. I was playing around with the Accordance block diagramming, or phrasing as it's called, a little earlier today, and it's just a bit fiddly to get things in the right place, and sometimes it will indent with a tab, sometimes it will indent with a space, and those kinds of things just make it difficult to work with. So I'm not convinced this is a great way of doing it, which means then you're probably going to end up using something like Microsoft Word to do your diagramming, which is okay, right? That's great, but it's not really going to teach you much in the way of Bible software tool usage if that's what you're going to do. A couple other little notes here. Let's look at some of these things. First of all, let's talk about this from a grammatical point of view. Now, because this is designed to really have you sort of work through the details of just like some basics, really, it's not going to give you any paradigms to learn. So if we have a look at chapter 5, for instance, when we get into nouns for the first time, we can see here that there's actually nothing in here. There's no paradigms here whatsoever to learn. And if you compare that to something like, say, the noun system in Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, when you get into the nominative and accusative and you look at the Greek, well, you've got here all these paradigms that he starts to give you, which are helpful for learning the material. But again, you don't get any of that when you're in here inside of Greek for the rest of us. And the same goes too, if we jump down to chapter 15, where he's talking about the cases in more detail, the same thing goes here as well. What you're getting here really when you're looking at cases is you're actually getting more of an idea of this is kind of how the cases are working, rather than this is what the cases actually look like when you put them all together. So it's a really rudimentary approach to Greek grammar, in the sense that you're not going to learn a lot of those details. Now, for a lot of people, I'm sure that's really attractive, but I'll come back to why that becomes an issue later on. There are also some things in here that I think are confusing. For instance, if we look at prepositions, we can see here his definition of preposition I don't think is a particularly helpful one, but this isn't really a big issue. I think this is consistent with his, it's pretty consistent with what he's got in his Greek grammar as well. He just finds it the same way. I think there are just better ways of defining this, but again, this is just not that big a deal, and I think you'll get it by the time you go through the chapter. So it's not a really big issue. The other thing about this is that he's still, when it comes to verbal aspect, Mounce is kind of on the fence, I think, when it comes to verbal aspect. He's bought in fully to say, yes, aspect is a big issue, and he will say possibly as big as time. And I think the way most grammarians would argue now is that time is at best a secondary element of a Greek verb, at best a secondary element, whereas Mounce seems to put time and aspect kind of at the same level. And again, if you're just learning to look around in the language, then it's probably not that big a deal. But if you're going to learn the language properly, then you want to probably understand aspect a little bit more in depth, I think, than what this book will give you. But again, probably not a big deal if what you're doing is learning to study and do phrasing just by using Greek. So let's not get too lost in that. And he does still talk about deponent verbs as well, which is kind of interesting. He doesn't agree, like he's not holding to deponent verbs, not teaching you what a deponent verb is and saying there are such a thing as deponent verbs. He's just telling you, it used to be that there were deponent verbs, now they're middle verbs, and it's a thing. But if you ever hear someone talk about deponent verbs, well, that's what they are. So he's dropped the deponency thing, which is fantastic. And we see that in the 4th edition of the Basics of Biblical Greek as well. Now, this book really is designed around accordance Bible software. And so for that reason, it's kind of ironic in a lot of ways that when we get into this, I'm on Logos Bible software here, and I'm showing you screenshots of, accordance Bible software, which is what he really prefers. And it's really interesting. This is quite tightly integrated with accordance in many ways, not in a sense that you have to use accordance if you're using it. You can see he's got olive tree here as well, and then underneath he's even got Logos Bible software too. But the point is that there's a number of resources you get natively with accordance at their lowest package levels, which he refers to in this book, which is great if you're going through this book and you just get the cheapest version of accordance, but you don't get those resources as easily with other packages. And so that's just something to bear in mind. And again, there's some good things about accordance, like it's a really fast app to start, but it's not, there's other things about it I'm not a big fan of. If you'd like me to do a review of accordance Bible software and look at it and compare it to Logos, I can do that. I'm not a huge accordance expert, but leave me know in the comments below if you'd like to see something like that. When it comes to looking at the exercises in the book doesn't actually have very much in the way of exercises. This is kind of one of those things that kind of bothers me a little bit, because to get the exercises in this book, you got to go buy another book, which means you're paying extra for the exercises. And in my opinion, the extra exercises are just not all that good. Let me show you what I mean here. It follows the same layout and everything in terms of the sections and whatnot. The key difference here, when you get the exercise book, notice first of all, if we look at how long these are, you got the answer key here at the end. That's pretty cool. That's really helpful. That's on page 85. So you're really buying this exercise book for about 84 pages worth of exercises, and some chapters don't actually have any exercises at all anyway. When you do get exercises, what you tend to get is one of two kinds of exercises. Either you're going to be going through and completing exercises that are in the book. So for instance, if you go back to this chapter, which is chapter 10, you'll find here in chapter 10 that this is on word studies, and really it's just trying to get you to go through the steps for, the Greek, for the words in the word study for section 2 here. So identify the Greek word. So go back here, here's the Greek word. So the English word, the Greek inflected form, the passing, and so on. So you're really just filling in the blanks essentially in that sense. The other sorts of exercises you do tend to get here are really just where you're asked to remember facts and numbers and names and all that kind of stuff from inside the book itself. And I'm not sure this is a high value thing. Define the following terms. Agreement. Well, you just look it up in the book. It's there in the book. What information should be included when you pass a verb? And these are probably larger than they should be, but there they are, right? What are the two linkages between a verb and its subject? So the point of all of this is just to say that the sort of questions you're being asked in the workbook are not the kind of questions that are going to ask you to, go back and look at what you learned, and it might help you remember it, but it's not the kind of exercise that's really going to help you internalize the information. So I'm not sure how good this is going to be. But again, if you've been through this, or maybe even a previous version of this, maybe you've been through Mounce's beginning Greek course, or his Greek for the Rest of Us course, I would love to hear from you in the comments. What did you think of this? How did you find it? Did you hold on to the material that it taught you? Are you still using that material? How did it affect your ability to study the Bible? I'd love to hear from you in the study section below, in the comments below. That'd be great. Because that would really help me to understand just how effective something like this really is. But as I'm looking at this, I'm wondering just how effective something like this would be. Now, again, if you're going through an online course and you've got the videos and you watch the videos, you go through the workbook, you go through the exercises, maybe that would be the way to do this. But if you're just going to work through this on your own, just as the book, you're going to be really just reading and then regurgitating simple answers, and it might be helpful, I guess, to some extent, but I'm just not sure how helpful it would be. And certainly I think the value in this book is in learning how to do the phrasing side, and that's really, I think, those are the exercises that are going to be the high value exercises, and you don't need the workbook to go through and do those particular exercises. So I would be inclined, if I was recommending this, to get the Greek for the Rest of Us and learn how to do the phrasing, and probably not buy the workbook. Do a little bit of underlining and highlighting, write notes in the margin. You'll probably find that's just as effective as getting the workbook. But at the end of the day, this is just another Greek grammar. It's teaching you Greek grammar. It's just not teaching it to you as in-depth, and it's not teaching you in this sort of traditional method either. In the traditional method, what I mean by that really is it's not giving you everything all at once. It's kind of giving it to you in two passes, which again is kind of consistent with Danny Zacharias' approach, except with Zacharias' approach, he's actually teaching you to read the Greek rather than just use the tools. The other thing about this, of course, is if you're using Logos Bible software, it's not going to give you anywhere near as much help as if you're using Accordance Bible software. Now, the last thing I'll mention here is that even though you're not going to be doing much grammar in this, he's still going to encourage you to learn some vocabulary. We don't learn a lot. I think it's about 109 words that he gets you to learn in this grammar. Compare that to his full grammar, where he's going to get you to learn 330 words. This is a much smaller sort of vocab load, but you're going to get some vocabulary every lesson anyway from about chapter 3 onwards. So that's fine. It's good. I would encourage you to learn the vocabulary as well. But again, if you're going to start learning vocabulary, why not just learn to read the New Testament in the original language? It's going to take you a little longer, but you're going to be able to do everything that's in this grammar and more, and it's not necessarily going to take you a lot longer, and certainly going to get a much better understanding of lots of things, tools usage, and far more ability to use lots of different tools that you wouldn't so easily be able to use just reading a book like this. So would I recommend this book? Kinda. If you're dead set against reading the original languages, then a book like this might be helpful. And here's another thing. If you're going to go to a seminary, or if you're going to teach Greek in a seminary, and you really don't want your students to know that much Greek, this would be probably a good book to take them through if you're not going to actually teach Greek, I hesitate to say this, but properly. This would be the sort of book that might be worth taking a look at. But again, Danny Zacharias' Biblical Greek Made Simple is also really good, and I'd probably recommend that over this. Because it does actually still take you through paradigms and explain word endings and formation and things like that, which this will do a little bit of, but nowhere near as comprehensively. And then if it's between this and Basics of Biblical Greek, well, then the question is, are you going to learn to read Greek properly? And if that's the case, then probably there may be other grammars around that I would recommend that would be better than either of these in that case. So it's not an easy book to recommend. Again, if you're dead set against reading Greek and you just want to study it, yep, consider this. This is a good book. And certainly there's nothing wrong with the material in here. It's really just finding its place in the market. That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out. Where would I put this in terms of the overarching sort of set of books that are out there for you to work from based on the different goals that you can achieve with those different books. So good book, nothing wrong with it. Where does it fit? Not entirely sure. There are other books which I think would do a better job and give you a better bridge. There are other books which would do, get you all the way to reading Greek, which would be more beneficial, I think. But then it's up to you and what your goals are. But let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. What are your goals for learning Greek, and how have you used this book? If you've used this book and previous versions of it as well, did you keep the Greek you learned in this, and so on? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you're interested in learning Greek for yourself and you want to go and do it properly, we would love to support you. Head on over to bma.to/roadmap, download our free roadmap to mastery. It's going to give you everything you need to sort of guide you from knowing nothing all the way through to being able to read the entire Greek New Testament fluently without having to look up words or anything like that, and you're going to be able to study it at the same time. That sounds like a good goal to me. If that's you, bma.to/roadmap. Thanks so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. See you then.